help people in other countries, and that may be true politically, but Singer's saying it's not true politically, and he recognizes that there are practical effects that in the previous centuries it hasn't been possible for us to. I mean, it has been to a degree, but not to the degree that it is now. And Singer, keep in mind, Singer wrote this article 40 years ago. Think of the technological improvements that have happened in the last 40 years. Our abilities to improve the standard of living, around the world have grown, a thousandfold or even more. So it's not as much a practical matter anymore. I mean, it is a practical matter. It's easier to help somebody, who lives in your neighborhood than it is to help somebody in Bengal. But it's very possible to do so in the world that we're living in. So Singer says no, proximity doesn't. From a moral standpoint, if you hold to that we live in what he calls a global village, and you hold a universal moral position, human rights position, universal human rights, then proximity doesn't matter. Okay. So some of there are many objections to Singer's claim that, if people are starving and dying, and we have an affluence, we have more than we need, we're morally obligated to provide that to the people that are starving. There have been many objections to that position. The first one, is a very old objection. There's a notion in ethical theories called supererogatory or supererogation. And that says that there are certain acts that are good to do, but they're not morally required to do. For instance, serving food, at a local soup kitchen, something like that. Under our moral code, we're certainly not obligated to do that, and it goes back into this conception of negative versus positive liberty. But yeah, I mean, it's under most moral codes they would say that's a very good thing to do. So a lot of people want to say that, while it would be good for people to give their money to the poor, it's not morally required. And especially, you can see this really on the strong principle, where Singer argues that, look, you need to take yourself down to the minimal level. I mean, you're right on the verge of marginal utility. And if there are other people out there that are in much worse off position, and this really cuts into our beliefs about individual liberties and things like that, and what we're required to do, and sort of the sacrosanct nature of individual freedom in our country. Another thing is, it's an argument that's made against utilitarianism as well, is that, look, if we're trying to make sure that everybody basically is on the same level, on the equal playing field around the world as far as standard of living goes, those that should be working all the time. We should be working all the time to bring everybody up to that minimal level. And the question is, what room does that leave for us to pursue other pursuits that we think may be important? Maybe we think that, poetry is important. Maybe we think music is important. And if we're required to give all our energy to making sure that everybody is on a level playing field, then these pursuits, who knows, maybe Shakespeare never would have written his works, or Mozart never would have composed, because we all would have been too busy, we all would have all been too busy trying to bring everybody's standard of living up. So there's a question that comes in about, and this is the question, what is of moral significance? That's the question, because when Singer talks about, without sacrificing something of moral significance, some people may want to say that taking time to attend your child's, piano recital is of moral significance. Now, Singer might dispute that, but this brings in the question of our society, right? Because in our society, we say that there are competing views about what is of moral significance. So that's what leads us to our negative conception of liberty. We think that there are competing views of what is morally significant in our society, and for that reason, we can't make a positive claim about this is something that you should do, because there are competing moral visions. So that leads into sort of the Western world's at least hypothetically or theoretically, this leads into the West's view that you can't take positive action, make sure somebody has a positive duty to aid other people, because that depends upon what is morally significant to that person, and the state has no right to do that. So that's an interesting argument against Singer's position. I would argue, and many other philosophers like John Rawls, for instance, argues that there is an overlapping consensus in moral views, and this overlapping consensus could be a place where these types of positive duties could reside to help other people. I think most moral codes out there would agree that it's wrong to let somebody else starve, especially if you can prevent that. And if there's some sort of overlapping consensus, perhaps there can be a positive conception of liberty that can be made to support that. One thing that I heard a lot was that this would be great. I mean, but it's very idealistic, right? I mean, it's just not possible for us to do this. Human beings are selfish, whatever. They don't want to do it. You can't force anybody to do this. In a utopian world, this is what would happen. But we don't live in a utopian world. But I mean, as I pointed out in some of the posts, I don't really buy into that line of thinking, just because social progress throughout history has involved people who were willing to say that it is realistic for people to have equal civil rights. It is realistic for women to have the right to vote, just because it seems impossible in a certain scenario that it is. I mean, one thing that if you look throughout history, human beings have progressed. I mean, when this country started, we were basically committing genocide against the Native Americans, and we had enslaved another race. Now we've come to a point in our history where, everybody has the right to vote, and African Americans, obviously, are purportedly have equal civil rights. They've certainly come a long way since the beginning of the country, and even in the last 50 years. So you can't tell me that that's not social progress. At the time, people would have said it, during the Civil War, even in the late 1800s, people said that, you would be doing a great disservice to African Americans to abolish slavery. I mean, many people thought that if you abolish slavery, it would lead to the eradication of African Americans in the United States, because they wouldn't have the civilizing effects of slavery to keep them alive. So that's moral progress. In a similar way, it's easy to look at this situation now and say, yeah, well, it would be great if we could get rid of world poverty, or I feel like a Miss America contestant right now, but to say that if we could get rid of world poverty, that would be great, but it's idealistic. I'm not so sure that we're not in a situation where, with the wealth that we have, it probably is possible to eradicate world poverty. Why not? And I think it's a worthy ideal. And I think all it's going to take are people like Singer and people who are dedicated, as he talks about at the end of his paper, philosophy professors, teachers, whoever. I mean, anybody that's interested in these issues to take a stand and say that, yeah, we can do this. And, just as it took a lot of work to abolish slavery, it took a lot of work to get civil rights for people, we got there. So, I mean, even our future, I mean, as the events of 9/11 and the events that are going on geopolitically have shown us, our future survival may depend upon these things, because if somebody is poor, if they're on the verge of death, then they're desperate, and who knows what they'll do. And, we live in an age where, technologically, it's a dangerous world technologically. So if that technology falls into desperate hands, then that can have grave consequences for us all. So yeah, so I do think that I think it's important to do so, and I think it may be possible. So the idea that it's just idealistic and it's utopian, there are certain things that are utopian, I would agree, but I'm not sure that this is one of them. Okay, this week we're reading Martha Nussbaum's Women's Capabilities in Social Justice. We've talked about human rights a lot, universal human rights, and what could be some of the justifications for universal human rights. Kant says it's based on human rationality. Nussbaum is following up on a Nobel Prize-winning economist from Harvard, Amartya Sen, he came up with something called the capabilities approach. And the capabilities approach basically argues that universal human rights are grounded in the fact that as human beings we have certain capabilities that we can carry out. It kind of goes back to the Declaration of Independence. We have the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. John Locke said the pursuit of property, work, the right to pursue our religious beliefs, all these capabilities. So if these capabilities are being suppressed, then that is, that's a violation against our universal human rights through the capabilities. So anyway, it's an interesting paper, and I look forward to hearing your discussion on the posts. And I will get your participation grades up this week. And yeah, I won't see you next week. So happy Thanksgiving. I hope you guys have a great holiday and start thinking about those paper topics. Have a good week.